Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're Zooming in from or podcasting in from. You are reaching Global Chamber. We are doing this event live and it's being recorded on our global podcast. So, however you're hearing us or seeing us, we really appreciate your interest in global business. We have a very special treat today because we have someone who, sometimes I think, hey, I feel pretty good about myself. I have 35 years of international business experience. Bill has 12 years on me, and he's used those 12 years and all 47 of them very wisely in learning lots of information about a lot of different industries, and we're going to go into that today. Another thing we're going to talk about is Bill sent over some notes, and I was looking at them and I thought, wow, what a logical, great way of thinking about international business. And so we're going to talk through that point as well. So if you're interested in becoming a better consultant, if you're wanting to know more about how you can grow your business or help others grow their business internationally, I think you're going to get some really great tips today. Bill, thank you for joining us today. You are an extraordinary person. It's interesting looking at your career. It looks like you've got a lot of franchising experience, but you've got 4+ decades of really deep international experience, particularly with China, the Czech Republic, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Iran, Turkey. These are not kind of normal countries, if you will, in terms of a typical American. So congratulations on all that. I think I saw somewhere where you've had really deep experience in 50 countries. And it's included oil and gas, technology, education, project design and management, and B2B, B2C businesses. So you've got such a rich, wide, and deep experience. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today and undoubtedly learning a lot. What did I get wrong in your bio, and what would you like to maybe emphasize or re-emphasize for our audience?
Well, first of all, Doug, it's an honor to be on a Global Chamber podcast and to work with you. Of course, you've established a network that's unique in the world, unparalleled around the world to get people talking. And in these days, it's absolutely essential to network remotely because we can't do a lot of travel. I was very lucky early in my career. I started life as an oil exploration engineer and worked for a major U.S. oil company who looked for volunteers to go to international places. And my wife and I, Nancy and I, volunteered. For better or for worse, we volunteered to go to various and sundry places, and we fell in love with other cultures, with what was going on around the world, and we decided that we wanted to make that our life, was learning about other cultures by working in countries and living in countries also. So you summarized things pretty well. And I'm very happy to be here and willing to answer any questions you have about the world today and how to expand into the world today, given the interesting times we're in.
Very interesting times, agreed. How did you and Nancy come up with that decision? What was it? You were sitting at dinner over a glass of wine in some place and you said, this is for us?
We were very, very young. Okay, we were like 22, and we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into, Doug. But it sounded very exciting. We had with the oil company, we had an assignment in Alaska in the early 70s, and you had a choice then of they treated it as an international assignment, so you got a leave and paid trip home. Since we didn't have any kids, we were only married a couple of years, we decided to take a tour to Asia rather than going home to the States. And we went to Hong Kong, Tokyo, several cities in Japan, and Taipei. And we got hooked on other cultures. Wow. We decided we really liked Asia because that'd been the only place we'd been. And And then along came an assignment to go to Indonesia to live, and the rest is history.
Fantastic. How is she kind of integrated into your global life?
Well, Nancy passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, but she was a medical practitioner, and so she couldn't get a work permit in any of the countries we went into to work as a medical person because I had the work permit because I was working for the oil company. So she volunteered. She volunteered to social welfare groups. She went out into small villages in Java, Indonesia, and taught doctors and nurses up-to-date clinical practices. Little 5 foot tall, blonde, blue-eyed lady in the middle of Java was an interesting experience. It scared the you know what of me, but I had no control over it. And she did the same thing in other places, volunteering. So if she was here today, she'd tell you she actually enjoyed that practice more than she did when we came home between assignments, and she actually practiced for money as a medical person.
Interesting. Wow. Congratulations on that. Sorry to hear that she's passed away. And I'm sure it's changed a lot. You undoubtedly have a lot of memories that you've still got packed in, and a lot of physical objects, I'm sure, that remind you of so many great years traveling. Congratulations.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Given that and all of that experience in all these different places, I know you recently did a trip, so congratulations on that. We're in a time that's just so unique and different, aren't we? How do you view it?
Well, from February 20 till September 21 is the longest time I've been in the United States in my life since about 1974. Okay.
Wow.
And I did a trip to 3 countries in the European Union and the UK in mid-September, and that was quite an experience. It was 6 PCR tests and over a 14-day period, which was interesting. My nostrils were complaining at the end of it, but it worked. Everything worked. One of the things that we found is that over the years that I've been doing business, I've spent most of my time in Asia. And since I founded my company 20 years ago in August of this year, Asia's been our focus. After that, the Middle East, then the Americas, and then finally Europe and the UK. The COVID has turned that totally upside down. And the reason that that's the case is that those countries are in the 70 to 80% vaccinated range, European Union and the UK. They're learning to live with COVID. Some of them wear masks, just nobody questions it. Some places like Holland, you have no mask. But as a result, business is really booming in European Union countries. We were in Italy, Spain, Holland, and then the UK. And business is booming, and people are looking for new investments. What we do, our company takes brands into other countries and helps them get started up. In this case, we were working on restaurant locations in 4 countries for 1 US brand. So what's happened is that it's become easier to travel to some places than others. And also you have to be very cognizant of what the vaccination levels are. There's a direct tie between the vaccination level and how much business is being done. Because when there's a low vaccination level, there's shutdowns, people's businesses are not doing well. They don't really have money to look at new investments. And so as a result of that, they are holding off on any new projects. They're just trying to keep their current business going. That's the case largely in Asia. It's just the vaccination levels are very low in Asia Pacific, fairly low in the Americas, rising quickly, and countries like Panama, Colombia, Chile are coming out of it, and we're starting to see new investment there. But in the Middle East has continued to be an area where there's a lot of interest in the future. So it's a mixed situation, but there's a lot of opportunity. And as people come out of this vaccination problem or bubble, and their businesses get back so that they feel comfortable again. We're seeing great interest, more interest than we've seen in the past on new business development, and when we were in Europe, the atmosphere was extremely optimistic, very optimistic. So there are always going to be opportunities. It's just they're going to be in different places at different times, in my experience.
No doubt. And the way you say that, reminds me of one of the great skills of amazing global leaders, and that is they have flexibility and resilience, and they approach things calmly. You're approaching chaos very calmly. Congratulations.
Well, you have to approach it calmly, and you have to approach it with a long timeline. Expecting you're going to go to a country, make a lot of money right off the bat, and is not going to happen these days. It takes time. You have to first of all, I think it's very important to choose very carefully where you go. And we just talked a little bit about what's happening with vaccinations. The other thing that's happened is during this time, governments have changed an awful lot of regulations on how to do business tied to COVID. And so it's critical that when you're doing business in another country, you are very careful as to what the regulatory situation is. It's changed, I can tell you that, all over the world. Then you want to be very careful about choosing your partners, because quite honestly, a lot of businesses have suffered very badly in countries. They don't have the cash flow that they had before. They don't have the assets. And you want to be sure that before you start doing business with someone, that they're going to probably be in business in the future. Okay, that's pretty important. I would say the number one thing, though, and my secret, which I don't mind telling everybody in the Global Chamber because they're special people, my secret over these years was something I would have never expected from somebody who grew up in the Deep South in the 60s and 70s, and that is the value of culture. If you can understand what the culture is in a country, then you can do business and make money. But more than that, it's valuing the culture and being sure that the people you meet understand that you value that culture. Nancy and I were very lucky in the first place we lived together in Indonesia, which has a tremendous culture. We made lots of friends, local friends. As you know, Doug, we actually adopted an Indonesian child when we were living there. And so we have a bit of culture to remind ourselves every day. But if you see everybody else's culture as equal to or better than yours, which most of them are much older than ours, and you value that culture and you keep it in mind, you will succeed in business. That's my bottom line over 47 years.
Fantastic. Great lesson. Not just understanding, but respecting, and not trying to elevate one in importance in another. If you're doing business in Japan, you better be cognizant of and following local culture in a non-judgmental way, because that comes up through, right? I mean, you've worked with probably, oh my God, so many different types of people over the years. And when you've got somebody that you're working next to, you don't always have a choice of who that person is. And sometimes they're just tone deaf, right? In terms of those kinds of things. And you're kind of cleaning up the bull in the china shop syndrome. That happens occasionally. I'm sure you've had that, right?
Well, I have a classic case. I'm not going to give you names, but I have a classic case in the 90s. I was working with an American brand, taking them into Japan, which is one of my favorite countries. And we worked almost 3 years on this partnership. In Japan, the culture is consensual. Everybody has to agree to do the project. It's not transactional, it's consensual. So you have to get agreement all up and down the management line. And we had worked so hard on this. And so it came time to take the CEO of the company to Japan, to Osaka, to meet the senior people of the Japan side. And so we got off the airplane and we went to a ceremony, a formal signing ceremony of the partnership. Okay, I know this is taking long, but it'll be worth it. And this is an American who had a passport but had not done an awful lot of international business. He had delegated anything non-US to me, and and didn't really want to know anything more about it than when it was a revenue event. So here we are standing, you can imagine this, Doug, because you've been there. It's myself, an interpreter, and this person on one side of an area, and then 4 senior people from the Japan side on the other side facing us. And this person, the CEO, was supposed to make a little speech, but we're so honored to be here. You know how it is, Doug, and we're really excited about working together and everything. But before he had done that, everybody had shared cards, and you know how they share the cards with facing you, because their card is their soul, right? I mean, it's their life. And so this person, the CEO on the American side, took the card of the president of the Japanese company, and as the CEO was speaking, he folded the card into several parts and stuck it in his back pocket.
Classically wrong.
Luckily, we still kept the deal, but I thought it was dead. I had never seen anything like that in my life, and to me, that's the ultimate faux pas. But it was ignorance, okay? You know Japan far better than I do. You can imagine how excited everybody was about that.
I bet. When I was going to kind of jump into some of the steps of growing, but you raised in my own mind the question of when you do have people like that, even if it's kind of like that's an aberration, but not too far sometimes from the way people think or don't think. How do you prepare, like if you're working with a client, how do you prepare them in a polite way, right? Most people, I think, are very receptive to that, but it's still, there's a time that they need to kind of digest, and they'll probably never get all the way there in terms of fully understanding, but you certainly want to make sure that the big faux pas, like what you just talked about, don't happen, right? How do you do that?
That was a learning experience. I learned from that never to presume anything, and to go into countries very, very, very well prepared with the senior people on my client side. So whenever we start working with the client, I send them Terry Morrison's book, Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, about this thick on 60 cultures. Well, first of all, that scares the you-know-what out of them, because they go, oh, no, we don't know. We can't learn all this. And I said, well, that's why you hired us. But then before we actually have a meeting, and then during the COVID crisis, before we would have a Zoom call, I would go through that with them, 5 or 6 bullet points about how to deal with the people on the phone or people we meet in public. And frankly, since that unfortunate time in Japan, a learning experience, I've never had that sort of experience again. In fact, I find that nowadays people are very excited about knowing how to talk and how to deal with people, so that they don't make mistakes and feel bad about it. So giving them Terry Morrison's book has not only scared them and all the things they need to learn, but also told them that there are differences that they need to look up before they go to Japan, look up before they go to Vietnam, and make sure that they understand things.
Before we started, I mentioned about the event we did 7 hours ago, and it covered some cultural issues around Japan. And one of the speakers is Dominic Carter, who is Australian originally and just so knowledgeable about the Japanese market. And he was talking about the concept of when you're in a meeting with Japanese, if you've got a lot of experience with them, even if it's in English, you're picking up cues from them that a normal person who's not exposed to that culture doesn't see, right? So there's all this whole thing going on with body language and what's not being said. And you having so much experience in Japan and with other cultures, you're in tune with that, right? So that's an example where you can't give them a book and have them pick that up, right? That's an experience level, and that's why they would hire you, right? You teach them 2 things. One is don't make these big mistakes, and then for all this other stuff that's happening that you likely won't see, even though you might not phrase it that way, right? There are things that are going to be happening that will come up along the way that we can help with, including sitting in a meeting and picking up all those cues. Are they interested or not? And things like that.
Well, I think a good example of that is notice who's in the room with you. What level are they?
There
Okay.
you go. Good point.
And then who sits where? Okay. Who sits where? In China, when I first went there in the early 80s, I learned that very quickly as to who sat where and who was in the room. And that's actually pretty good anywhere you go in the world is to, and then of course to just to watch and see what's going on. Nowadays, we don't really need interpreters so much anymore, but we need to be very careful about what's being said. And one of the things I want these people to understand when I take them in that room is that they need to respect the culture they're going into, number one. And number two, don't be transactional. Don't ever tell your Chinese partner to be what that time and day your plane's leaving, because you'll be negotiating the really tough points in the contract in the car on the way to the airport.
Good point. Exactly. You started talking a little bit about it, and I wanted to get back to that. The kind of the key framework, or it felt like a framework of how to go about global business. The first being, where do you go? And how do you make that decision? And I think that's a key part of what you do today, right? With Edwards Global Services, you're
Right.
you keep up on what's going on in the world with regulatory issues and what markets are happening. And then you work with a client that has, all sorts of different products and services. You work with so many different ones. And now you've got to be thinking about, okay, here's the product service side, here's the market side, here are the regulatory issues. And that looks like a chaotic mess to most people, but somehow you bring sensibility to all of that. How in the world do you do that?
Well, it came from my years of being in the oil industry when we had to really become project planners in order to figure out each step of how we were going to go about finding and drilling for oil and producing it. So I developed a structure that I've applied to every business I've taken international. But you really need to make sure that, number one, you need to know enough about the country you're going into to make sure you can make a return on your investment that's worthwhile in that country. Because no matter whether you're a very small company or you're Boeing or Yum Brands, you only have a certain amount of resources available to develop around the world. So you want to make sure that you spend your time in the ones that are going to give your particular brand, your particular product or service, the highest potential return on investment. So that means looking at not only things like consumers, how many people are going to be willing to and able to buy your product or service in a country, not the population of the country, determining on what rules and regulations there are for foreign companies to come into a country, because in some countries it's more difficult than others to do business. Little things like, can you get paid? Some countries don't like hard currency going out to pay foreign companies, otherwise known as places like South Africa, Brazil, and China, that make it difficult to export the profits or fees or royalties or whatever it is that you as the foreign company are going to get. And then you need to understand what is the cultural change, if any, you're going to have to make to your product and services in order for it to compete in the local marketplace. So we developed a program called Global Assess, which analyzes all the pieces of the puzzle to prioritize countries for each specific brand based on 12 different parameters, and figuring out where the best place is for them to focus their search for a partner, a licensee, a distributor, whatever. And one of the things we do is, at the end of that, we do a financial model for over a 10-year period of what it's going to look like to develop a certain set of countries, revenue and expense projected based on what the product or service is and cost in the home country, then that segued to what it'll cost in the foreign country. So what you got is you've got a smaller set of countries to focus your time on, with a higher chance of success.
Got it. I think we both realize, watching others work, and even in our own cases, right? We're not 100% successful, but I sense, and have always sensed, that international work there's more failures. And I was speaking with someone the other day who's sending me a link to a McKinsey study that said, for every success, there's 4 failures, which seems high. I'd want to see the data on that, but nonetheless, it does feel like there's more failures than successes on international. And so by starting with a framework that you're talking about, the chances of a failure like that get off to a better start, don't they?
Well, they do. And, choosing where you go, choosing who your partner is in the country, making sure that you fit into the local culture and business environment. If those are done, your chances of driving that 80% failure rate down are much, much better. I'm not sure it's 80% either, but I think it's probably close to 50, because very often what we find is that companies go into a country that it's a place they've gotten the most internet leads from. So, we had one company that was getting lots of leads from Pakistan, and that just wasn't a fit. But they were getting a lot of leads, and they said, "Well, why?" And we figured out why. But that was that. When they looked at the financial model, they said, "Whoops, no, that ain't going to work. We're not going to be able to get enough units open. We're not going to get enough sales." But people do, by and large, not by and large. Many people follow the internet leads, and that doesn't necessarily mean those are the countries that you can make money in.
The other, for exporters, certainly one of the key things is the accidental exporting, right? Is like suddenly you realize you're exporting to Germany. And so the logical thing is to now build out in Germany, right? Well, maybe not.
Well, I think you have, if you're exporting, you may be getting good leads from the internet, but you need to, of course, document what the actual market is. Is it one-off? Is it going to be a large situation? With the European Union, you have to deal with labeling and packaging situations. You have to deal with an awful lot of rules and regulations as a foreign product as to what you can bring in and how you can sell it. And so it takes some study to do that. I know one brand we worked with had to remake their product totally, because it was a dessert product, and European Union countries allow no GMOs. And that was a US product that had GMOs. So they had to redo the entire formula of their product in order to take it into the EU. That's an expensive process. So you can't just do a one-off in a place like the EU. You've got to make sure that you're going to be covered as far as what the regs are going to be, what the buying power is. There's an awful lot of opportunity in the EU right now, really a lot. I saw it in Italy and Spain and Holland on my trip, but it's not the easiest place to do business in. And I think, Doug, one of the most important things, this, is there are going to be costs up front. There are going to be costs for like trademarks, intellectual property, legal documents, visits to the country, training, support, product development, all sorts of things, logistics, supply chain. And sometimes people don't think about that. They see a big order come in and they go, "Oh, this is good. We can do this." Your comments on that, Doug, because you've got different experience than I do.
No question. Everybody wants to spend less money, and sometimes we get a little bit too optimistic, or thinking, when something good lands in our lap, that the next thing coming is another good thing in our lap, and that's not always the case. I love the way you've started this kind of framework, which is, number one is where are the best, and looking at it very logically. Being an engineer and also business person, what you laid out there was very logical and sensible, and I can see that conversation then happening with someone, whether it's a senior level executive or it's a client, which would be a senior level executive as well, to be logical. The next step, though, it becomes, and you touched on it, is beyond the logic, there's the people. And so who you work with, first of all, how do you go to market, right? So kind of, you've got that aspect, but then you've got who specifically are you working with partners and distributors and things like that? And so there are some real personal, I mean, it's a business decision, but there's some personal decisions, what your management team looks like, right? What their talents are, what their interests are, how good they are and professional and ethical. And so there's a whole series of things related to that that's not so clear cut, is it?
Well, I think that what you're referring to comes under the topic of due diligence, knowing who it is that you're going to be working with in a country, and you need to be very careful about that. It's sometimes hard to get companies to spend money on due diligence, and what I tell them is, if you're going to do an agreement, it could be for a very long time, and whoever that person or that entity is that you have as a partner, distributor, licensee, whatever in the country, is going to be representing your brand. So they will be your brand in the country. And it's important to know who the people are, to make sure that they have a good reputation, to make sure they have enough infrastructure to do the project, and to find out what their things like their credit rating, what they've done with other companies that they've worked with, that sort of thing. Because it sounds good to talk on the phone nowadays, or even to meet in person, but you need to know the background on people. And in our country now, since 9/11, we have some requirements by the U.S. Department of Treasury, which is called OFAC, where you have to make sure that whoever you're dealing with doesn't have a terrorist background, doesn't have a mafia background. Their companies are known, who owns the company, where the money comes from, who are the people. All those sorts of things take time, but it pays off. It pays off in the long run. I've been very lucky to work with some companies that are just absolutely dedicated to due diligence. They see these agreements, or whatever they are, as marriages. Of course, marriages don't always last either, but sometimes they can last for a very long period of time. So you really want to know who it is that you're getting married to.
How do you typically do that? Do you go outside, or do you, or a mix of checking? I presume you've got to go outside, right, to get a professional to do some.
Well, I think we have people on the ground in 27 countries that work with us, that know the market, and they work with us. Once we have the name of the group and some information about it, they do research. They very often use their network to find out who the people are. Okay. If you're an American company, you can use the U.S. Commercial Service to help with that. There are groups like Kroll that do that do Dun & Bradstreet in some countries, can even come up with a credit record for the executives in the company. We did a project in China a couple of years ago where Dun & Bradstreet found out what the credit ratings of the senior executives were in China, which I was flabbergasted at that. But there are a number of sources. And of course, there's the old internet to do research on the internet as to who the people are and where they come from, and where the money comes from. There are a lot of sources these days to do that, and the challenge is doing it in a process format that's cost effective and time effective, but is complete.
Got it.
And I will say it's easier done in some countries rather than others. We have a client. One of our clients is an Australian food and beverage brand, and they had a candidate in Bangladesh, and that became extraordinarily difficult to get the detail we needed. But in most countries nowadays, you can find out that information. It just takes time and research. I've got a person on my team that just loves to research online, and she comes up with all sorts of interesting information on people and companies.
One of the most impressive presentations I've seen, within Global Chamber was one by Cold Stone Creamery, and their philosophy around building international relationships that have a 20-year life. So the agreements. Yep. They signed. And so when they, it really kind of hit me, because I never really have thought that way before until I heard that. And so when you're talking about being locked in for 20 years, the things you're talking about right now are pretty critical. I doubt, or maybe, I don't know how many people sign agreements thinking 20 years out. I hope a lot do, but definitely you want to do all the things you just talked about, right? Just to make sure that, the people that are there, the company, the partners are going to be, are who they say they are.
Well, in the franchise sector, it's very common to do 20-year agreements. In
Okay.
fact, it's or else 10 plus 10, 10, and then if you're following the terms of the agreement, another 10. That's not unusual. One of the biggest challenges we see these days, and this was pre-COVID, by the way, is infrastructure. The partner's infrastructure. Do they have enough people that are experienced in business, that are management, that can take on a new business and open a new business like Cold Stone Creamery? We worked with them quite a few years ago when Doug Ducey was the governor of Arizona, was their CEO. That was almost 20 years ago. And they're like other large international US food brands. They're very structured, and on what they want as far as a partner. And they do look at it as a long-term relationship. Yes.
Actually, it wasn't quite that long ago, but it was a long, probably started about 20 years ago. And you probably then know Lee Knowlton, who was the guy who gave that presentation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we probably have some stories we can do offline about all of that. So what I heard you talk about so far is, do the analysis of where, understand the who. You talked earlier about, the importance of culture around all of this, and making sure that that's, you understand it, you respect it, and then that's being dialed in from a cost perspective as well, that you touched on. Another aspect in a fourth area that you talk about is management. The management, like if you're working with a company, you probably need to, or you ask about, or you get a sensibility about how committed they are, right, to this. It's like, yeah, we want to go and do this. Okay, well, there's indicators to you, undoubtedly, sort of like being in that Japanese meeting room, right, that you pick up that say they're committed or they're not committed, and you're picking that up no matter what they're saying, I'm sure.
Well, really, that's number one. You've got to see that there's a strong senior management or ownership commitment to international, because international is not just a part-time job. It's a major strategy direction for a company, no matter how big they are. And if one of the things we do with our Global Assess program, the kind of a sneak thing we do, Doug, is we get to know the company when we're doing the assessment, and we figure out how serious and committed they really are before we take them on as a full client to take them international.
Wow. So is it numeric, or what? How does that? How do you find out what
that is?
No,
it's building a relationship and seeing who they have committed, what kind of finances they have committed. Do they understand that upfront fees have associated costs over time? That same CEO I was talking about with Japan, he every time we closed the license agreement, he saw it as a standalone revenue event, and I had to keep telling him that there were associated costs to do business. So that's why I like to build that model I was telling you about, to show them what the revenues and expenses are going to be over a period of time, to let them understand that this isn't going to be an initial big hit to your bottom line, and that you are going to have cost in order to succeed. But I think really it comes down to each time we talk to people is whether there's that commitment to international, long-term, not short-term. You're probably going to find this surprising, but I've actually had companies approach us and say, we need to get a few big fees up front for a license or distributorship so we can make payroll. So can you help us find a licensee overseas?
Wow.
I've had that happen a couple of times. I go, no, that's not us. We don't want to be associated with you. I didn't make that up, Doug. It actually happened. So, and so
Walk away.
we've been working now for a couple of years with Chili's. Chili's, the restaurant brand, and they have an international division. They have international support, international menu development, international supply chain, international legal. They've got, they're already in about 30 countries, but they have dedicated resources This is serious business for them. They're part of a publicly traded company called Brinker. I don't mind saying that. And they have made a decision that international is important. And so they made a commitment, a major commitment to it. And so when we're talking to potential licensees for them, we can say, look at this commitment, of resources, training, support, otherwise that you're going to get if you become part of Chili's International. That is what we really, that's a model for us as to what we want to find as far as a company is concerned, because they're committed long term, and the partner they're going to get is going to be a better partner long term.
The issue being, they want to do something today, and then a year or 2 or 5 years down the road, you find out that they weren't because something happens, right? And the wind blows them in the wrong direction because they haven't got their feet on the ground. And so it probably happens, despite all your due diligence, you probably had that happen a couple times.
Let me be clear, that wouldn't be Chili's. They've been international for 20 some odd years, and they have a huge team. But yes, you have, and I don't think it really is the size of the company. Frankly, we've seen some big companies that go through changes, and all of a sudden, international is not the flavor of the month anymore. And so, the people that we were working with who were dedicated to it are gone. The budget's gone, and we've had that happen with companies of fairly good size, which I won't name, but one of our keys is to try not to spend our limited resources helping that kind of a company. That's why I try to discourage them up front. I say, look, this is what it's going to cost. This is how long it's going to take. Are you willing to do this? And they sometimes look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm trying to help them make a decision. And usually that decision is made at a very high level, and they've committed a budget. And you just try to make them understand that it's going to take time, but if things work out in a certain way, it'll be worthwhile for them. And there's so much desire these days to go global, not only out of the United States, but out of so many countries, because 96% of the consumers of the world live outside the United States. And more than 2/3 of the new middle class consumers in the world are in Asia. So it's kind of hard to ignore that market if you've got a proven product or service.
That makes sense. Could you talk a little bit about how technology weaves into all this?
Well, technology has saved us, frankly, in the last so many years as far as doing international business. It certainly saved us during COVID when we could talk to people remotely, because we couldn't send people in country to meet with people or even work with partners we already had. We couldn't do that. And so technology has allowed us to keep up with what's going on with the visual relationship. But the thing that has really made the difference is web-based management systems that collect data on the operations in other countries constantly through the internet, and feed up into a dashboard that shows the company here at home, whichever the home country is, what's going on in the business. Whether it's retail or food or service or auto service, or it's a financial services. It's a web-based management system that's used by the partner in the country to run their business, but it's instantly seen by the headquarters back home. So you can remotely see very quickly if there's a problem. For example, in a restaurant, if there's strange things happening with inventory, your people at home are trained in knowing that means something's going on, and you can raise a flag and get it fixed. I think that web-based business management has been tremendous development in the last 5 years has it become ubiquitous around the world. But there's that. And the other thing is that you can allow online training 24/7 through the internet. If you have a product or a service, you can get your staff trained online through online training programs, which flourished tremendously during COVID. And will become absolutely more essential going forward. All of that's technology based. It's all working. Even we have a small restaurant brand that we represent with about 25 units in the States, and they're able to manage China, Philippines, Australia, and now Saudi Arabia. But a lot of it has to do with remote management of training and operations.
Fantastic. Great insights. We've been through 5 pieces of or areas to think about: the ROI piece and the analysis, the who, number 2, number 3, the culture, cross-cultural and issues there, number 4, a top management commitment, number 5, technology, and then finally number 6 is something that really important. You've set the framework, you've got things going, things are moving forward over X number of months or years, and then stuff happens. And so what's so critically important, and all of us in international business know, is that it doesn't always work like you planned from the beginning sometimes, but even if after a year or two, something happens. And it's so important to stay diligent, because that something isn't always obvious in the beginning. Sometimes it is. 2 years later, something catastrophic happens, or something starts happening a year in and you're not noticing it for some period of time. So there's a series of things I'm sure that you've installed into your companies and the people that you work with. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of this issue?
Well, first of all, you need to constantly monitor what's going on in the countries you're doing business in. And if you've got a partner, a distributor, a licensee, and they're tied into providing you, data from their operations or sales or whatever, KPIs, then you can monitor that remotely. And as the parent company, you should know what's right and what's wrong. Like I mentioned earlier, if you've got a strange inventory change in the restaurants, the home brand will know what that means, and know somebody's ordering the wrong thing or something's going wrong. Constant communication with the partner, licensee, distributor, constant, with established times to meet and discuss what's going on. Monthly reports on the business. That's always helpful. Another way, though, is for you to monitor what's going on in the country or in the region. And as you know, during COVID, we started our EGS biweekly global business update newsletter that comes out every other Monday. And the goal there is to try to figure out on a more of a macro country and regional level what's happening. Are there things happening that are unusual, that may be impacting your revenue that you're getting from the country? The other thing is to have frankly, people on the ground who are watching, who are monitoring, who can call you and say, Ahmed's got a problem. We see one of his companies is going under, things like that. I didn't mean to pick on the Middle East. That happens to Jose also, or Juan, but
or Bill,
I think it
or Doug,
or Bill, or Doug, yeah. Yeah, right. I think it's just absolutely essential to constantly monitor what's going on, not to wait for the quarterly report or the annual report. Okay, so that requires communication. It requires monitoring of respected information sources. It requires people on the ground to know what's going on in the business, to do things like we call mystery shopping. And mystery shopping was very important during COVID, where we would have someone go into a restaurant, one of the brands we represent that's already operating, and just be a customer and see how things were going, because it's on the ground is very important. I'm a huge believer, as you know, in research and data, Doug. I mean, I'm a nut, I'm an addict when it comes to data. And knowing what's going on is so important, because if the results come back bad or they look strange, it might not be the fault of your partner. It might be the fault of what's going on around them. Because I know this may be hard to believe, but governments do change things. Look at what's happening in China these days with regulation hitting businesses. that we never thought would ever happen before. I have a call right after this with a company that's trying to get through that, trying to figure out what's really going on, and
Wow.
sometimes it's really hard to figure out what's really going on. You don't want to blame Ahmet or Jose or Juan or Doug or Bill if it's not their fault, and sometimes they may be reluctant to tell you, just because they don't want you to feel bad, or that they're a little worried about what's going on. So I think in addition to building the relationships up front, we haven't talked about that, you and I, but I know you and I, well, we haven't talked on this podcast, but you and I have talked about that before. Building relationships up front is essential to success. If that's not done personally, then when things go wrong, you're not going to find out. When people ask me what's the number one parameter about finding a partner, I say passion for your business. Passion for your business. Because then if things start going wrong, they're still going to stay with the business rather than closing it down. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It sure does. Yeah. So I think you've framed it out, and I'm going to be digesting this for a few days, because I love the way you've laid it out in a way that I haven't seen before, and I think others that are listening also will be able to use that. We'll end up writing a blog post that, if it's okay to publish that information with around the Bill Edwards process. We're talking, by the way, with William Bill Edwards, CEO and global advisor at Edwards Global Services. The conversation we're having today is live, and it's also being podcast. So if you're listening to this as a recording, thanks for listening, and you've been getting quite a treat here. We are close to the end, Bill, so we've only got a few more minutes. I'm wondering, kind of maybe either in summary or things that we haven't chatted about that are important relative to international business. What else would you like to say or cover?
Doug, you know what I'm going to say now. It's been, first of all, I want to be clear to everybody that I've made huge amounts of mistakes over time. Okay, I'm trying to help people not make the same mistakes. Nothing's perfect. Lots of mistakes, God Almighty. But I think the bottom line is that I've taken away from my career is the relationships I've made around the world, the people I've gotten to know and respect. And that takes time to do that, but it's really worth it. I recommend really getting to know people you're doing business with. And that means not only business and their company, but also their personal background, so that you become part of their family. It's really amazing. I have kind of a sad ending and then a good ending. When my wife Nancy passed away, I got 12 letters from Turkey from people that have met Nancy when we lived there.
Wow.
I can't conceive of having ever gotten letters from lots of people without relationships. I think it's that, Doug, you've done the same thing. I know you personally, and know that you value relationships tremendously, because that's what Global Chamber is all about, is relationships. It's the first organization that allows us to really develop global relationships efficiently. And I thank you very much for that effort.
Wow, thank you. That's a great way to close it. Really appreciate it. Bill Edwards is not just got 47 years of experience, but he's got infinite wisdom around international business and life. And what's more important than that? To live a life that's full and rich and exciting and interesting and helping others, and to continue to be able to do that. It's certainly something that I admire greatly and really appreciate. Bill, all that you do, and certainly greatly appreciate our relationship as well. So thank you today for sharing so much wisdom and knowledge for the Global Tribe. And I'm sure there will be some additional questions. And so those of you who have some, please reach out. info@globalchamber.org will get you in to us, and we'll be happy to to answer any questions and to engage on whatever topics are of interest to you. And Bill, you're not turning down new business these days, or are you?
No, no, we're open to helping companies succeed outside their home country. But I want to thank you, Doug, for the opportunity to be part of this.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody, for joining. And we're going to be closing off the podcast right now. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy whatever conversation or whatever meeting comes up next. Thanks, everybody.